Hi, welcome to the COVID-free bathtub. This is the COVID-free master bather, Scott Bradfield. No others. Don't accept no substitutes. There's just me and the world of our fellow master bathers out there, which is the world is full of them. That's what I've learned. I'm glad to have met all of you. Anyway, this is the second of our COVID-free or COVID-enriched or COVID-free episodes, where I'm basically just catching up with all the stuff we had stacking up before I got the COVID. And then during it, what I was reading up to my first kind of relatively peaceful days yesterday and today. So we've got lots of stuff to cover. As I was saying in the last episode, I went through a couple of days. I think people who've had it may share this, may understand this. You really can't concentrate when you have this stupid thing. I don't know what it is. And some of it's just the discomfort. But there's something it does to your head. I got to tell you, for a couple of days. And when I finally got at the beginning, I was able to read, and then I couldn't read for a couple of days. And then, as I was slowly getting back, I brought out the comfort food, which is we've talked about it before. This is a marvelously wasteful. We know we have our little theme shows. This is marvelously wasteful, which is just silly books that have literally they do nothing for you at all to improve your intelligence or your understanding of the world. But they make me happy, and that is the Dr. Dolittle books. I read on Kindle a book I never even bought, which is the very first Dr. Dolittle book, which is called The Story of Dr. Dolittle. And it's a little introduction to the character, the first book written by Hugh Lofting, about how he travels to, I think it was a Spider Monkey Island, to help the monkeys with something, which I've already forgotten. And the Kindle version was like really cheap on Kindle, and with all the original illustrations. You kind of have to have them for the illustrations. There's lots of free versions which you can get, but at the same time, these are really you have to have it with the actual illustrations. These are the most beautiful parts of the books, really. And I mean, there's the gotta be careful here. The frontispiece of the Voyage of Dr. Dolittle, which is the second book in the series. I knew these books as some of the first books I ever really loved. We've talked about them in the past, but I went back and actually reread. So I read The Story of Dr. Dolittle, which I'd never read because it didn't have Tommy Stubbins, and the stories it was a very shortish book, and I never read it, but I really enjoyed it. I found it really easy and pleasant, and all the stuff I loved about Dr. Dolittle, going around trying to learn different languages. And then I went right straight into the book I most memorably have read and reread in my life and written about as I got older. The Voyages of Dr. Dolittle. I'll put the dates down here. These are early 20s. This is the proper first edition. So the proper first editions are the Stokes. It's not the British versions. Hugh Lofting had horrible experiences in World War I. There's not a lot about his life, even on the Wikipedia page. Wrote a book of war poetry, which is World War I war poetry has got to be the most depressing stuff you've ever read, which I have not read. And as my friend John Clute likes to talk about, many of the great fantasists came out of World War I and the horrors of that just absolutely stupid, violent, vicious war, and wrote fantasies just to kind of deal with their PTS, their PTS. I mean, I'm sorry, PST. I don't know what that is. PTS. Their post-traumatic syndrome, and Lofting was one of them. He moved to the U.S. I think he lived in Connecticut, and he died, weirdly enough, in Tahunga, Southern California, in Tahunga near L.A., where I lived in the San Fernando Valley, not far from the other two great fantasists of his generation, Edgar Rice Burroughs, who in Tarzana, and L. Frank Baum in Hollywood. These three kind of incredibly important writers of children's fantasies. And he died there in I don't remember, the 50s or 60s. So anyway, the proper first editions are actually these old American editions. If you're a collector, don't go for the British ones. And my friend John Clute again helped me buy these, and we had them repaired, I remember, years ago by this kind of cool repair person that Clute knew. Anyway, the stories are not like the Eddie Murphy books though the premise is the same, which is that he's a guy who studies. He's actually as Clute writes. Clute's article about him in this SF Encyclopedia is good, which is he's actually very scientific based. They're almost science fiction stories because Dr. Dolittle is a very science based character, and he goes out and he's a natural scientist. He calls himself a naturalist, and he goes out and studies languages. In this one, he's trying to learn shellfish. I can't laugh. He's trying to learn shellfish, and he's going around talking to different types of crustaceans so that he can learn shellfish. And eventually he meets a giant glass snail. I don't know. It's a real crazy book. And I remember this is one of the very first books I ever read as a 5-6-year-old. And the idea, just look at these incredible, beautiful. This is when he goes to visit a guy in prison. I do love the illustrations. And Tommy Stubbins is a little 7-year-old boy in the town where they live, Puddleby on the Marsh. And he's kind of from a poor family, and he goes to this house and meets all these animals who are all talking, and Dr. Dolittle is talking to them, and they all talk to each other. They've all learned each other's languages. And he wants to go work with the doctor, and he volunteers his time, and eventually he becomes an apprentice. And as a 7-year-old boy, the 6-year-old boy, the idea of being an apprentice to Dr. Dolittle was just the coolest thing in the whole world. So anyway, the Tommy Stubbins tells the stories, and this one they go off on a voyage looking for a famous Indian or Native American naturalist. I forget his name now, Red Arrow or something. Anyway, they go looking for him, and there's a couple of they want to learn crustacean, and they travel by closing their eyes and putting a pin in a map, and that's the way they decide their destinations. And there's all these different animal characters, and it's just a lovely, lovely book. It really works, and it's great for COVID. If you're sick, you got COVID. I can personally vouch for it. It'll keep you entertained and keep you absorbed. And I went on while I was reading that. I actually ordered a book I'd never read because I knew was not told by Tommy Stubbins, and I had assumed this was an early book that came before Voyages of Dr. Dolittle. I was totally wrong. I looked it up. Isn't that just a cool little book? Look at that beautiful cover. And this is the third book in the series called Dr. Dolittle's Post Office. And I'm about halfway through it. I haven't finished it. About halfway through, I got kind of stuck a little bit. But the basic premise is that he goes, I think he's in Africa. And Hugh Lofting, by the way, is, he's very politically incorrect. He's very much, some of his books have been revised, even by his family as far back as the 50s and 60s, because of some of the language about Africans, and so forth, and some of his pictures and stuff. I wouldn't say that they're viciously racist books. I would say the same about Dr. Seuss, that there's certainly representations that people are not comfortable with. But the original books, this one actually starts off, he's actually trying to help a woman, an African woman, recover her husband who's been taken off by slave traders. And so he helps them do that. And then as a result of that, he stays in Africa to help this little town, which doesn't have a post office, develop a post office so it can communicate with the world. And it's sort of an interesting metaphor for Dr. Dolittle. And I think I wrote about this maybe 30 years ago when I wrote about these books. His books are all about communicating. And it's all about people talking to each other and telling each other stories and kind of understanding one another. And the whole story of Dr. Dolittle is to communicate with all these animals who all come to visit him and tell him their stories. And there's a lot of Decameron-like scenes. The second half of this book seems to be just a bunch of characters sitting around telling each other, all these different animals telling the stories of their lives. And this book kind of gets a little lost story-wise in those stories, but the little stories are all good. But the notion that animals can all talk to each other seems to be a very positive thing in Dr. Dolittle. So the post office strikes me as kind of the perfect metaphor for Dr. Dolittle's vision of a perfect world and Hugh Lofting's vision of a perfect world. A man I don't know hardly anything about, except I love his books. So anyway, there's some books. There's some good COVID books. The original, I prefer the original versions. There are kind of modified versions of Dr. Dolittle. You should get them with the illustrations. And the original first editions, the U.S. first editions, are very cheap. This is a pretty decent copy of Dr. Dolittle's Post Office. I think I paid $25, including postage, on eBay. Let me see if I can show you this cool picture. Oh yeah, there's the cover again. There's always like a nice color picture at the beginning. Can you see that? And then you can take the, what do they call it? Onion skin? Let's see if I can show you the. Let me see if I can just show you that. The front of this piece. They go on the title page. Oh yes, not easy. Oh, there you go. That's a beautiful. Look at that. It's a beautiful copy of the front title page. All hand illustrated by Lofting himself. Anyway, those are lovely books, and we may talk more. But if you're really feeling sick, you want some comfort food, I love Dr. Dolittle. Okay, take care. Bye.